Well, Ben Farrell is Global CEO of the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply and also a former British Army Colonel. Ben, great to have you on the show. So the issue of funding hung really heavy over the Nato summit. How much of a hindrance is this?
Yeah, clearly it is very much in the forefront of everybody's mind in today's conference, but it was clear that when the Secretary-General spoke this morning, he was keen to stress the progress and the commitment that we're seeing in a lot of nations really beginning to step up. You know, and I've seen firsthand, I've been to many of the European capitals, and it's quite right to highlight those who are not, you know, at the moment, obviously meeting their obligations, but many nations clearly are and have the intention to step up and commit to the growth in defence expenditure. I can see from the defence procurement community around Europe how more and more nations are leaning into this and going to, you know, certainly express the intention of increasing their GDP expenditure on defence as the evident threat from Russia is clear in everybody's mind.
Well, Ben, I also want to talk about the UK. The UK's outgoing Prime Minister Keir Starmer arrived with no long-term plan, apparently. Do you think that he is on a collision course with President Trump again?
Well, it's a very good question. Clearly, the defence investment plan that was long awaited in the United Kingdom was indeed published recently, and there were one or two areas where people are questioning the affordability of some of it and where the money was coming from. So there has been a published plan, to be fair, and there have been certainly the intention expressed within the Ministry of Defence to meet these levels of spending commitment. So to some extent he's taken a deliberate step in that direction, perhaps before leaving office, and that may well be an articulation of the intention longer term and to avoid the confrontation potentially with President Trump. I think to some extent, I'm not sure the concentration of the summit's really going to be beyond that. But the United Kingdom has made a clear commitment to be at 3.5% of GDP by 2028, increasing to 5%. So I think, you know, that's a clear commitment. The question is now, is the delivery of that commitment.
And apart from the defence deal, Iran, the wider Middle East conflicts and the Ukraine-Russia war apparently are expected to be discussed, but the issues are more than just about defence issues now, aren't they? We have just seen how much conflicts affect supply chains holding the rest of the world to ransom, apparently, now.
No, it is, and we've recently done a survey, and the level of anxiety amongst, you know, supply chain professionals around the world is a sort of high water mark. It's receded slightly in the last few months, but you know what's happened, and we can see this has happened, is to some extent, you know, the supply chains have been weaponised. The ability to constrain supply through the Strait of Hormuz were new phenomena. I was recently in the ASEAN region, and for the very first time, I'm not saying it is an imminent threat, but people were talking about the Strait of Malacca, 24 million barrels of oil going through there on a daily basis. And the first time ever people have recognised, you know, the way that global trade flows is in itself a vulnerability, and the prospect of that being increasingly constrained and weaponised is a reality of the world we live in today. So supply chains are increasingly at the vanguard, the forefront of the conversation about, you know, national security and resilience.
And your recent survey, you mentioned that just now, saw a very small drop in anxiety from procurement leaders, but it's still very high, isn't it?
It is. It really is. And that has been growing and growing over the last few years. And we're not just talking about the obvious recent impact of the war in Iran. We're talking about a compound effect over a number of years, whether it was through originally the war in Ukraine and then the tariffs changed. So progressively, I think the reality of where we are in global supply has been ever more recognised, and the vulnerability of that. So 4 decades of globalisation have taken us to a place where cost was the preeminent driver of supply chains, and increasingly people are thinking now about the vulnerability or the lack of resilience in some of these supply chains. So this is why increasing supply chain professionals are being looked to in organisations to provide the answer, to provide continuity of supply, and increasingly they're anxious about the ability to do that with the level of disruption, you know, we've seen in recent months.
Thank you very much, Ben, for your insight. Thank you.